Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mouthy Money podcast. I'm joined as ever by my good colleague and co-host, Chris Chu. Chris, hello.
Hi Ed, how you doing? You right?
Yeah, trying not to pay too much attention to the world news, the global news cycle at the moment. I think
Awful April has begun, apparently. Fantastic.
awful,
What a way to start
awful,
spring. Thanks very much, everybody.
awful April quickly followed by terrible Trump, etc. Um, we are here today to be an island of serenity and good vibes. I think for the listeners. So we're joined by Charlie Richardson. Charlie, welcome to the podcast.
Nice to meet you both. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So Charlie, just tell us before we kind of go into today's topic. Tell us a bit about yourself. Who do you work for? Where do you come from?
Yeah, so I'm co-founder and CEO at Lumio, or Lumio Technologies. And Lumio, we have a simple goal of building the best financial products for modern couples at every stage of their relationship. In terms of my background, I worked in investments, wealth, and product growth, and was one of the first in the door at a software data analytics company called Chargerify before we were acquired a few years ago. And then soon after that, I founded Lumio with Tom, Adrian, and our CTO, Anton, as well.
So, couples money. Now that's a really good topic to dig into. Unfortunately, we are looking like a bunch of blokes on the podcast at the moment, so we're going to try and express. I'm going to try and express some equal viewpoints from what my
Tread
wife
carefully.
Yeah, exactly. My wife listens to this podcast, so I might get in trouble.
I wish mine did. It would help, wouldn't it? Anyway, there we go.
Chris, so this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about couples money. We're going to learn a bit about Lumio because you guys have got a really interesting sort of proposition about how to solve some of those modern day dilemmas. Chris, I'll start with you though as a jumping off point. How does your relationship work around money? Do you spend it? Who's in charge?
I definitely don't spend it. Yeah. No, it's interesting. When we first got together, we've been together about 16 years and married for since 2019, so 6 years of that. But we just had complete polar opposite views on money, on a lot of things, but money in particular. So it was Tanya's very much live for the now, or was very much live for the now, and I'm very much like be careful now, to quote Father Ted. So I'd quite happy to sort of make, if I've got my my sort of savings in and all my kind of long-term planning sorted, then I'm happy to kind of push forward. And what's happened is I think I'm too far on the cautious side, and she's a lot more on devil may care a little bit. And over time, we've managed to meet in the middle to good effect. But there was a period where transparency around what we were spending and how we were spending it, as we kind of moved our lives together and started living together and all that kind of thing, was quite tricky. It was quite difficult because you kind of, there's an independence associated with it. I'm sure Charlie will fill us in on that, but a bit more. But you're moving from two single individuals with strong views on how you spend stuff into a couple with shared aims to a point. And then as we've moved on and got married and had two kids, we're just on the same page, which is great. And have had so many conversations around money that good ones where, sometimes she'll say, you need to cut yourself on a little bit and we're going to spend some money on a nice holiday, or we need that thing. And I'll say the same thing and go, what's going on with your pension? Why aren't you putting any money into that? Or do we really need to spend money on this and that and the other? Whilst also leaving room for luxuries and things that we like as well, where we can. That's getting a lot harder, really, awful April conversation previously, but, and, childcare costs and all the rest of it. But where we can, sort of understanding our thought process around it and the emotional journey we go on with it has made that a far less fraught conversation. But initially, I think if Lumio had been around, we might have got there quicker, would be my take, Ed. How was it for you?
Well, so I mean, as is mostly the case with my personal finances, I have a very meticulous spreadsheet that basically organizes our entire system of
We are
personal
shocked.
finance. Yeah, this is a common theme on the podcast, Charlie. Sorry. So basically, I've developed my own proprietary spreadsheet where I put in our net
The Edmund
income.
Greaves ink spreadsheet, is that it?
Yeah.
Is that it? Yeah.
I put our net income in each month, and it using an algorithm that I created myself, it portions out how much of our spending, so how much of our spending on bills we're each liable for. So it's like, I mean, I earn a bit more than my partner does, my wife does. So I end up liable to paying a bigger proportion of the bills, basically. And then we do stuff like, so those are all the fixed costs like mortgage, bills, all that kind of stuff. And that gets apportioned evenly, apportioned based on our income. And then you have all our kind of own personal costs. So stuff like, it might be like, I have a subscription to a podcast or something like that, and that's something that she doesn't use. So I spend that out of my own money. And then at the end of that, it spits out two numbers. One is her spending money and my spending money. So we both have our own spending money. And actually it becomes fairly even by the end of it, because it's a form of socialism in my personal budgeting, where we're apportioning the wealth, distributing the wealth on a monthly basis among ourselves.
So libertarian in your views and Trotskyite when it comes to your wife
Absolutely,
spending money.
yeah.
Is that it?
Estate planning? Yeah, very carefully estate managed. No,
5-year plans, Ed. There we
the
go.
interesting, and part of what I want to learn a bit more about today as well with Charlie, is actually the one thing we don't do well as a couple is we don't look at our long-term wealth building and planning and saving. And we're not great savers. Like, we both got pensions and stuff, and we were good for saving for a house deposit with our lifetime ISAs and that kind of thing, but now we're not that good at that kind of portioning off savings at the end of the month. And also, I mean, things are pretty tight generally for everybody, but yeah. So with that,
I was going to say, Ed,
go on, Charlie.
You definitely don't need Lumio.
Right, Charlie, let's get down to it.
Until you said that you struggle for saving, until you said that you're saving at the end of the month, and I was thinking, well, you should be saving at the beginning of the month. So maybe we'll come on to that. That's kind of methodology.
Yeah, that's a good point.
50, 30, 20, but it sounds like you've got it pretty well covered.
Well, yeah. So I try talk us through Lumio then. In that case, what is it in a nutshell, and what are the aims that you guys want to do with it?
Yeah, so I mean, as a product, I'll speak about Lumio first and foremost. So yeah, the product that we've built today is essentially the simplest way for modern couples to start managing their money together. And our goal, like I said, is to build the best financial products for modern couples from the first day they meet until the last, obviously. The current product that we have out in the market is both an app store product, but we also work with banks who are looking to engage more deeply with modern couples. Within that product, you have a personal space for your personal finances and a shared space for your shared finances. We've built on top of open banking. I don't know how much of the listenership are familiar with open banking, but that's basically a secure way to connect your bank accounts, credit cards, savings, and some investments. And then you can decide which accounts you link or add to your shared space within Lumio. The key piece for us is, and kind of central to all our design principles, is flexibility. And I think kind of what Chris outlined and then you outlined is every couple is different. And that's something we've had to take forward. So critically with Lumio, you're in full control and always in control of what you share. And you don't have to share the full account details and all the transactions. You can share one-off transactions, recurring bills. And the principal aim is to build a single source of truth for your finances. We could talk maybe a little bit about the problem that we're solving in a second, but it's kind of the transformation. Even what Chris outlined over the last 10 years in his relationship is quite similar to what's actually happened broadly across the market. There's been a big kind of cultural and societal shift, which I think has landed us at the point where, to differing degrees, some people are adopting joint accounts, but a larger number of modern couples are no longer doing that. And that's kind of left them to end up falling into what we call an account gap. So the account gap is essentially where modern couples are no longer suited to those joint accounts. And that's exactly where Lumio comes in.
It's really interesting what you said about the single source of truth. I think there's a trust now with us in terms of, but there is, I was thinking about when you were talking there about how we've got a joint account, and I don't religiously go over it. I just put some money in at the start of the month, and that tends to do the job, right? But I think having that independence and having some autonomy over your money is quite important from a psychological point of view.
Yeah.
In terms of, okay, this amount of what I earn is up for scrutiny and is part of a wider life. But from a kind of psychological standpoint, I set aside a bit of fun money for myself and I'm sure Tanya does her side as well. And it's like, well, actually, Chris doesn't need to know what I'm
Yeah.
spending that money on, and it could be a little pleasure like a glass of wine with your girlfriends, or it could be, for me, it's football tickets, and I'm very open about that. But that's kind of, you know, where I like to spend a bit of money and time. Podcasts, I might treat myself to a book or something like that. And the idea that you'd be pouring over that might actually, in certain circumstances, argue about every little transaction, particularly as pressure grows with cost of living and things like that, might end up becoming a real sticking point within the relationship. So I think it's quite interesting that you set the parameters around that, Charlie. I think that's really important. And each couple's different, and actually finding the right balance for you. I suppose what I'm saying is there's loads of grey areas. Like there's light on everything that we've got, and then there's certain spots where it's like, actually that's grey for a reason, to give us flexibility, to make us feel like we can do something,
Yeah.
off the cuff or instinctive, or when it comes to spending, just to make sure you feel alive a little bit, if that makes any sense to you too. But yeah.
Yeah, I think like one of the biggest challenges we face with building the product we are is just the need for flexibility, because every couple is different. You touched on that financial independence and the kind of growing mutual dependency, and I think there's kind of, again, just looking back at things a bit more broadly from a societal or cultural shift. So get a few kind of stats to drop in, but the dual income households in the UK, that's grown 50% in the space of 22 years. So nearly just shy of now 80% of households in the UK are dual income households to a significant degree. And with that, you kind of got obviously a greater shift towards financial independence. So I saw actually TSB did a really good piece on this previous Valentine's Day, and I dug it up just before this call. The vast majority, so 88% people who are married or in a long-term relationship, still want to maintain a form of that financial independence that you kind of touched on there. And it's kind of interesting because while we work both, so our product works with joint accounts because we know how central it is to still a huge number of couples. But what we're trying to cater to is everything else, and how that fits in with your personal finances, and how that fits in with using personal bank accounts and credit cards for shared expenses. So trying to build that flexibility into that. And one of the really interesting pieces of research that also came out, I think it was AEG put it together, but it looked at the behaviors of women with this growing financial independence. And actually it showed that women, more women than men, want to show a greater control and almost personal accountability towards spending and saving money. And Chris, it sounds like maybe it was different in your circumstances, but I think that growing shift, like I said, on dual income household, greater financial independence has kind of gotten us to the point where more and more couples are using personal bank accounts and credit cards to manage their day-to-day lives, and shared expenses or not. It's just a huge trend that's kind of gotten us to this point where joint bank accounts are no longer that one-size-fits-all solution that they were 25, 30 years ago, when our parents would, be the first thing they do after they get married would be open that joint bank account.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could envisage using a joint account in that way where we just kind of both dump our incomes in there and see what happens. I think it would be chaotic. I mean, I compartmentalize everything anyway. So it's kind of like we've got two joint accounts, but one of them does all the bills. So like the mortgage and stuff comes out of that one, and we can both see what's coming out of that. And then you can also use that to, pay basically fixed costs. And then we have another joint account, which actually we use for our grocery spending. And we only spend that at the supermarket to buy, food, which is feeding everybody. But like, I find that point you made about kind of the growth in the number of the joint households, and that really interesting, especially with actually thinking about what a household is, because it's kind of like a household is bigger than two people, right? Because especially when you kind of start bringing kids into the mix and whatever else, there's an entity there, and we all talk about households that do this and that. And it's just actually, how do you cater to a family at a household level? And I think that's really interesting and powerful to be able to do that through that, this idea, as opposed and then within that, you've got two people who are maybe have their own independent things that they want to do with, what the money that they're kind of given or have access to or whatever. So I think that's really, really nice. And I like the idea, because we talk something else that gets talked about a lot is the kind of the single person penalty, which I think obviously is a major issue because, there's so many different ways in which a single person finds life more expensive. And I do find it quite instructive that, the number of joint income households has increased a lot as well
Yep.
with that in mind. But also we don't talk enough about the opportunity available to people who are able to have a dual income and, achieve more and be able to do more together with somebody else. And also, can we think about, non-traditional ways of putting this together? Could two mates do it? Is that something that you guys have looked at? People who live together but aren't necessarily in a couple? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've definitely looked at it, and we've also got customers that use it in that way. With any kind of startup, scale up, depending on which investor you talk to in Lumio. So, but there is ambitions to go into that route. So we have two expansions that we want to make over the next 2 to 3 years. One is into the multi-general or intergenerational sharing of financial data between families, so they can manage that transfer of wealth between different generations, so parents and children and grandparents. And that's certainly where we want to end up. But the product is obviously being built in a way that you can create shared spaces with anyone. So you don't have to obviously have a proof of identification to open a Lumio account. And that's really key to this as well. So we'll maybe come on to that, is the barriers to entry for a joint bank account and sharing those finances. And a big part of Lumio and where we work well with banks is we remove those barriers to entry. In terms of those like modern households and those younger households, yeah. So we do work, like I said, with varying degrees of what that modern household looks like. And it's really interesting that, going back to something Chris said at the beginning, is those key triggers are always big moments for financial reflection. And I think that's where relationships that tend to mature financially, because you go through those different junctures. So whether it's getting married or trying to save for a wedding, childcare is always a big one. It's that second mortgage that people experience, a change in job. And those big triggers are big moments for financial reflection. And often moving home is probably one of the biggest too. So whether that's the change in mortgage or rental payments can prompt those big transitions. When we've looked at like the households, the product is live and available for people to use it. We don't market to couples at the moment. We market only to couples at the moment and not to households, just because, like I said, we're obviously a startup that can only cater to so many customers, but we do have that functionality, and in the future is something that we want to expand into both. And we've got some really cool plans, which maybe we can come on to, in terms of how we can build out that collective savings within households and within trips. And that's a more kind of innovative approach that we want to take going forward as part of something called shared saving pots, that would allow younger couples in the first year, 2 years of their relationship, where they're not ready to pool assets. It would provide them with essentially the functionality to start saving together from the get-go without any of the financial risk and vulnerabilities to financial abuse, which are sadly really prevalent. You've got 1 in 6, or I think it's 16% of couples, of primarily women, have suffered financial abuse from pooling assets. And we've got a solution that we're going to be delivering with both banks and software providers that protects both couples and, in the future, households from that risk as well. So, yeah, went
I think
off
that's
on
really, really, really
the modern
interesting idea.
household is an evolving one, isn't it? That's kind of
Yeah,
the answer.
especially in those earlier stages as well, because it's like, I mean, to be honest, I don't, Chris, I don't know if you remember, but I don't remember when I crossed that kind of line with my now wife about when we kind of really started
You've got a
meshing
spreadsheet,
stuff
Ed.
together.
You
No,
can't
but
remember when you just check when you.
it's not. It doesn't. It's all live data, Chris. It's not. It's not historical, right? Yeah, we're not keeping a record here. It's a live
I don't
plan.
know. It sounds like you might be.
No, so it's when, like, I mean, I think it must have been when we moved in together, and that would have been just before the pandemic, I think. But
I think for
yeah,
us it was that, yeah, moving in
yeah,
together. That was
that's a
the
big,
big one. We started renting, and then it's
yeah.
it's aligning your money alongside your values as well. This is it. There were loads of conversations we had to have around: is that important? Why is that important? What's your attitude to debt? What's your attitude to saving? And we agree, once you agree those things as a couple. So initially it's just like, right, we live together, we're renting, we want to buy a house, so we need to save. Right, okay, how much are we going to save? And I don't have a spreadsheet. I've instead got, I monthly budget and put a bit aside, and then said, look, I earn a bit more, and you can do a bit of this, and there's a little money coming from the bank of mum and dad, and so this is what this looks like, and we could do it in X amount of time if we commit to this. I think maybe the first time ever was where we kind of pooled money was we wanted to go away together on holiday, and Tan just came back and said, I don't think I can do it, and I said, really? Okay, 6 months ago away. Why is that? And I think it was just genuinely, it's a case of sitting down and saying, well, if we do this and we get rid of that, then we will both be able to go. So I think it was that was a bit of a revelation for her. I was like, oh, okay, so we can jettison that, or you can pick up that. And all of a sudden it started to become a bit more collaborative. And that's just picked up over the years. There's still discussions about, as there should be, what's value for money? What should we be doing with this? Is it worth spending money on this new pair of shoes, or I'm talking about me here, or jackets, or whatever, that kind of thing. So there's always that kind of ongoing conversation. But over time, it becomes clearer that you've already kind of had them and identified what's important. And then when kids, you get married, kids come along, and then it's like, well, actually, some of this stuff is non-negotiable. This is just what we need to do in order to raise our kids. So then the pool of money in which that becomes debatable gets smaller, I suppose. And then, but also conversely more important. Going back to my thing around, we've got our collective things, we've got our stuff aiming towards the future, but actually you do need a bit of money to just mentally cut loose a bit. So I don't want to know what you're doing with that. It's fine. Crack on. I think I really think the information point you made, Charlie, is really important. It's like, what information do you want to feed into that, and what don't you? And then what are you willing to make decisions on that are right for you in terms of you as a couple, as a family, that align with your values and what's important. That's the key thing here. It's not a case of throwing everything open to scrutiny for everybody, right? It's all about degrees of how much you want to move into this. Am I right in saying?
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of data that kind of points towards the varying degrees in which people's finances are shared. Because I think one of the I kind of keep coming back to it, but I think where it's different for, to a degree myself, but Chris and particularly Ed, where it's different for you, where it is compared to maybe some of the younger couples in the first, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of their relationship, the vast majority of them aren't opening joint bank accounts. And so without a joint bank account and not pooling assets, you're not committing towards shared goals together, and you don't feel like you're making any financial progress. So the latest data that we saw was a YouGov poll, and more than 3/4 have no interest in committing to a joint bank account in the first 7 years of their relationship. So
7 years. Wow. That's interesting.
put yourself in their shoes. And so they're using personal bank accounts and personal credit cards to cover those shared expenses. And that's one side of it, becomes kind of that spaghetti junction of managing finances together. The other side of it is savings. So just under 1/3 of UK households, modern couple UK households, have less than £100 in savings. And so if we're talking about the bigger wealth building challenge, and you marry that up with the future state of state pensions, how are these people actually going to plan for the future and build wealth together? And I think that's some of the areas that obviously really concern me. The main reasons I kind of got into trying to help couples optimize their finances together. They're stuck in an account gap, but what does the account gap has a huge impact on both their personal well-being, their relationship, right? And we can come on, there's so much data around what the damage this does to relationships. We all know that there's obviously a higher relationship turnover today than there was 25 years ago. I think it's kind of fair to assume that, but it's how central lack of financial alignment or transparency is to those arguments. So Credit Karma last year did a big piece on this. So it was something like 1/3 of millennial couples have ended a relationship over their finances. Biggest source of arguments in a relationship comes under finances. And I didn't write down one other here. Yeah, so more than half of Gen Z and millennials say they fight about money in a romantic relationship, or 40% of them on a monthly basis. So these are problems, in my view, that are underpinned by lack of alignment, because there is no suitable account, no suitable solution for modern couples. Now, Ed, you are not the person, because you're a spreadsheet fanatic. For most people, treat spreadsheets with, well, not detest, but certainly a fear of complete tedium and time-consuming process which they will put off. At best, they're doing them every quarter, and I think they're doing quite well if they're doing that. And so they're using either spreadsheets, expense splitters, that mental maths from time to time with their spending, and also the sort of anxiety and awkward conversations that do come about. These are not people who have been together for 10 years and been through those bonding experiences of children and everything all the time. So a lot of modern couples do struggle as well. And I think it has a huge impact on, the kind of relationship health and obviously the trust that underpins that relationship. So those are quite a depressing set of circumstances, but it's obviously a big problem, and it was a big part of the motivation to fix that problem as well. Just really interesting diving into it with you guys.
I think it's really, I mean, that point about kind of young people is really interesting because aside from the fact that they might be dealing with finances as a couple, a lot of people, in their 20s, and I remember being, I'm no longer in my 20s, but I remember in my 20s, even just coping with my finances by myself was a big deal, and I didn't have anybody to argue about it with at that point, kind of thing. So when you throw somebody else into the mix there, it does, like you say, it adds layers of complexity. It makes things, more tense, and it really, if there are issues, it emphasizes them and it can make them kind of blow up. So I think that's really, really laudable actually to have a way to help with that, especially in the younger years. In terms of for you guys, what you see with how people do you get an insight into what kind of people's behavior, how they're managing it together? Are there anything that you've learned in the process of creating, the app?
Yeah, so we obviously the data is fully anonymized and obviously fully encrypted. What we do is try and use the data to help customers with obviously their budgeting and their saving going forward. So we can't obviously view any of the data, but we can run analytics over the top of anonymized data to provide those insights. I kind of mentioned, I guess, there's the number one rule and principle that we have is obviously to build with flexibility in mind. But when we look at the types of users that we're focused on, there's often a financial hero. Okay, so hero is maybe a strong term, but it's the one that we use internally, where there is always a financial lead in that relationship. So someone who will push saving for the future, often the budgeting and the categorization of those transactions, and how they're going to be managing the category spend going forward. And there's quite an interesting kind of generational, if we can generalize for the time being, where you have the super sharers. So, and they tend to be a slightly more mature demographic, maybe the three of us, but they would be people who are willing to share their bank account balances, credit cards, investments, and essentially pool all their assets and all their balances and finances. And they tend to be in relationships for like I said, 5-10 years, much more open and kind of working through towards an end goal together. Whereas couples in to the nascency of their relationship, first 4 or 5 years, I would describe that as, will tend to manage things obviously with personal bank accounts and therefore just adding individual bills on an ongoing basis, but also one-off transactions, whether that's going out for dinner, going out for drinks, and those one-off shared transactions. So therefore, they've got a much higher proportion of bills and those expenses coming from the personal bank account. So I'd say that's probably the most notable tribes or cohorts that we have using the product. The other functionality that we have obviously is you can add transactions and share transactions into your shared space, but you can also remove transactions. So there is obviously functionality that we know based on customer interviews and speaking to customers where some customers are happy to share their full transactions and share their account, but then they're removing transactions on an ongoing basis rather than the other way around. So those are the two most primary cohorts or tribes that we have using the product.
I was really interested. Sorry, if I could take a step back. Sorry, just to cut in, but
Cool.
on the wealth, the intergenerational thing.
Yeah,
I think we're in the business of trying to make people wealthier. I think that's what we want to do is help people understand that, and there needs to be a collaborative effort towards that. And we see that in our couples. We just talked about how we budget and when you're raising families and all that kind of thing. But I think it's a really interesting idea that you're sort of bringing the generations together in terms of that, and try maybe potentially, well, I know this is a plan for the future, but the idea that there could be a shared space where everyone can start to just have some information to back up what can often be a slightly nebulous conversation, helps people to make better practical decisions about managing that. I think that is a great idea. It's great on a couple level, like you say, because you can make that on a kind of week, monthly, quarterly, annual basis, and that's a good thing. And decide how you want to engage with that yourself. But if you could look 3, 5 years ahead, or 10 years ahead, or just even start to have a conversation where you're sharing some of that information in, things won't come as a shock when potentially there's a financial stress around, older, parents becoming ill, and what assets do they actually have, and again, it's up to them what they share, right? It's not a case of you have to share everything, but if you have a general idea of what is there, and you don't have to wait until the worst happens before you're actually picking through all of this, it helps you to plan more effectively, to get stung less, to protect that wealth better, to put it to better use. I think all of those things, the principles scale up over a bigger period of time. And any information that helps you to have they're going to be emotion-based conversations anyway, but any information you can have which can say, this is what this landscape looks like, this is the reality of where we are, and how we're going to manage that together, and this is what I want and this is what you want, can only be a good thing, in my opinion.
No,
Yeah,
no, go
I
on.
think
Sorry, go on, Charlie.
sorry. Well, I was just going to say, I think there's kind of two sides to it as well. So there's the wealth building element of it. So understanding if you're in a, I suppose, in a more privileged family background whereby you've got potential assets that you're going to inherit. But the other side of it is when you're nearing that moment in your life where parents are suddenly going into the power of attorney and you're inheriting that, and you're actually thinking about, okay, so there's actually some planning I need to start thinking about for my parents or my dad or my mum, whereby I need to start understanding their assets and how they're going to have the right care in their lives when things do change or things don't go, to plan. So there's a few sides to it, and I think the reason it's so important is because let's look at it on a for the mass market. I would say is there is not going to be the state support. Ed, I know you mentioned this recently to some acclaim, but there isn't going to be the support that, and I kind of fundamentally or more broadly agree with you. There isn't going to be the state support, and it is going to be means tested increasingly over the next. Certainly, by the time I'm ready to be means tested or ready to start taking a state pension that I don't believe will be there. And that's a much bigger conversation. But I think that does require a greater deal of planning for individuals, because I don't think it's fine to look at the wealth building plan for, say, the middle class, but actually looking at the much wider market that doesn't have that personal facility, doesn't have that personal support in the future, and isn't going to be necessarily part of that transfer of wealth. They need to think about how are they going to manage their parents' care? How am I going to manage myself in retirement? How am I going to reach retirement? When am I going to be able to retire? So it's kind of providing visibility on those and trying to allow people or deliver the visibility and information to allow people to actually plan, because they're going to have to a greater degree going forward, without doubt.
Yeah, I think I mean this is such a big potential rabbit hole that we could end up going down this entire. I mean, looking at things like intergenerational advice and the advice gap, particularly for younger people who, and this is something without wishing to deliver the mouthy money pitch, is that we banging on about constantly now is making a plan, having a plan, having an idea of what you want to do. We spoke to Dan Haylett a few weeks ago, and it doesn't have to be a 30-year plan. It can be 5 years, it can be 2 years, just as long as you've got in your head kind of thing, what you want to do in the future. I think that's so important. And as you say, there's, the things that we talk about, stuff's not going to be there to help you in 20, 30 years or whatever it might be. But making a start, making a plan, if you're in a couple, making a plan with your partner, having it clear what you want. I think that's it's so powerful to give people the agency to be able to make that plan. And it starts with what you guys are doing with budgeting and making sure that the right stuff is going to the right places each month, and that you're working, you're singing off the same hymn sheet effectively, right? I think that's so valuable. But yeah, that's really great. Really great. Well, Well, I think we've got the scoop there for pretty much. Charlie, it's been really, really, really interesting chat, and I think it's a really nice idea. So I look forward to hearing more about it in the future. We'll definitely have to get you back when you start looking at more of the intergenerational stuff. I think that'd be really, really nice to talk about. Charlie, thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me. Yeah, much appreciated. Happy to come back anytime.
And Chris, thank you as ever for being a partner in crime. And
No, it's
for
my
sharing.
pleasure. I'm going to see if I can get Tony to listen to this episode.
That's the hope. We live in hope. Thank you, everybody else, for listening. You can catch us again every week. Please don't forget to follow us on all socials, etc. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube. You can also follow all our latest updates on TikTok, Instagram, or X. Finally, check out all our money stories on the Mouthy Money website and subscribe to our weekly newsletter for all the latest straight to your inbox. Thank you and goodbye.